And this is the City of Moose Jaw's Notorious Jawcast. I'm Craig Hemingway, Communications Manager, and joined by Deputy Fire Chief Mike Russell. Mike, how are you?
Good, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready for anything on this Jawcast, Mike?
I think I am. Let's do it.
You are the man. You are the emergency measures coordinator for the city of Moose Jaw. In addition to being deputy fire chief, and often those things go hand in hand. But every year at this time, we celebrate Emergency Preparedness Week, and the theme this year is "Be Ready for Anything," and it's all about being ready when an emergency strikes. And of course, one of the complicating factors is we never know what that emergency could be, which changes so many variables. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Craig. And thanks for alluding to that. May 2nd to 8th nationwide is Emergency Preparedness Week in our country, and you're exactly right. It's be prepared for anything, be ready for anything. It's all about nationwide getting the message out to understand the risks, making plans, and then having a toolkit and putting everything together to possibly make sure you and your loved ones are safe for up to 72 hours in the event of an emergency.
Yeah, that is the key. Being ready for 72 hours in case a major emergency strikes, you're left without uh, shelter potentially. Heat, power, water, those sorts of things. But what are the challenges presented in creating that kit when, again, you don't know what that emergency might be?
I think some of the challenges, educating yourself on the risks and the risk factors, understanding your geographical location. There's great links out there through the province of Saskatchewan as well as the government of Canada, where you can actually go on and take those links, put into your general area where you live, say South Saskatchewan for us, Southern Saskatchewan for us, and then look at some of the risk factors. Some of the toolkit stuff is very basic and generic, and we'll go from risk to risk to risk, from factor to factor to factor kind of thing. So those are the everyday necessities that, be it a rainstorm, a snowstorm, a power outage, a tornado, a hurricane, flood, whatever. Whether you're being relocated or you're having to shelter in place, as you alluded to earlier, putting those factors and understanding those factors and putting those kits together, they're pretty generic generally. And then it's just basically understanding what's going to possibly transpire.
Yeah. So let's start with the basics then. What should be in our emergency kit to last us 72 hours?
Well, some of the first things we want to talk about is we always say have at least 2 liters of water per person per day in your household. So obviously, we're talking 72 hours. 6 liters minimum per person. Having food that won't spoil. Pardon my slur there. Having food that won't, something that you can utilize over those 72 hours, because you may or may not have access to your fridge anymore. And an ability to open those food sources, can opener, stuff like that. Try to have a manual can opener as opposed to electric, because you could be without power. Flashlights, we talk about having crank flashlights or having a battery, and then make sure you have spare batteries and that you check those in your kit regularly. The old school thing was transistor radios. We tried to say have transistor radios. Again, you may not have power. Today's day and age, make sure your cell phones are charged and you can utilize that. One key thing is having the Sask Alert app that is available online, and that you can utilize that as well. And then some of the smaller things we talk about is making sure that you have some copies of personal documents that you might need, i.e. passports, pieces of identification, a little bit of cash on hand if you have to relocate, stuff like that. Again, we don't want to go overboard because we don't want to be carrying too much in our household, but stuff like that. And then obviously creating your plan and putting your plan in your toolkit and making sure that not only your family that are involved in that household understand your plan, but reach out to any other loved ones that you may have to acknowledge through your plan, whether that be grandparents, the elderly, or siblings in another jurisdiction, just to let them know that this is our plan and we may have to relocate and we'll contact you. And then again, like I said, it's putting that plan together.
Yeah, we'll touch on the plan and also the Sask Alert that you mentioned. We'll get to that in just a bit. But as you go through that list, you realize as technology has advanced, certainly things like having cash on hand is far less frequent nowadays than it might have been. But if you're dealing in a situation where the power might be out, you can't, if you have to relocate, well, if the debit machines aren't working, then cash might be it. So that becomes even more important. And again, you mentioned having a radio. Certainly, as you mentioned, Sask Alert. Not only do those alerts come on your smartphone, but also those alerts will be issued to local radio stations and be played there. So again, to be able to hear those updates, that would also happen via the radio for sure. Now, when it comes to a plan, Mike, what needs to be in our plan?
Well, basically, in our plan, we have to understand what we're doing. We have to have contact persons. We have to have people that we would be, if we weren't able to reach the outside world, who would know what's going on with us, where we're going to go, how we're going to do that as a family. If we're sheltering in place, what are we utilizing from within our kit and how we're utilizing that. Again, it's different on every aspect because you got to play it again, and that's why I say go to the Saskatchewan Government Saskatchewan site and know the periodic risks for our area, so you can start your plan around that. I mean, we never know what's going to happen, but we do know in South Sask that we're looking at the risks of, say, potential flooding, which we've had happen here in the city of Moose Jaw. We could have winter storms and power outages, which we've had here in the city of Moose Jaw. Tornadoes are famous for coming across the prairies in southern Saskatchewan. But then we got to look outside of the box and start looking at other things that we could potentially have, whether it be being isolated or sheltered in place or removed due to chemical spills with commodities coming through our community, with different things like that. So there's a vast array. We have to make sure that our plan is consistent and understood by everybody in our household, as well as, like I said, the people that are important to us in the outside world, so they know what's going on. We also have to understand in our plan there's a difference between what we're going to do if we shelter in place and what we're going to do if we're being relocated and if we're being forced to evacuate. So how are we going to contact each other? Say your kids are at school and this happens, something like that. How are you guys going to stay in touch and contact and let them know we're registering here or we're being moved to here? So those are the things you have to talk about in your plan. You also have to, and this is a big one that a lot of people don't talk about very often, but what are you going to do with your pets? Where are your pets going to be located? Where are your pets going to stay? Do we have the availability for the pets to go somewhere? And when we talk about pets, and we do have a pet emergency checklist that we promote on our websites and are promoted throughout the province as well, in conjunction with the Saskatchewan Humane Societies. But one of the things is when we talk pets, we're not just talking domestic pets. We're talking animals and we're talking cattle. We're talking horses. We're talking, some of the big livestock. What are you going to do with those animals, and how are you going to protect them? Last thing we want is people staying on the property if they don't need to be, because they want to take care of their animals and their livestock, which to them is very important, and I get that. So you got to have plans in place for that as well. So a good solid understanding of what you're going to do and how that's going to transpire. I think one of the key things you mentioned, and we will talk about later, is the Sask Alert app, because those apps do give us a little bit of a warning ahead of time so we can put our plans into place.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple incidents that come to mind over the last couple of years. Last summer, in my neck of the woods on South Hill, I was driving to work on a nice summer morning, and as I'm pulling out of the driveway, I see the police on our block, and they're telling everybody that we have to leave our homes because there had been an incident with the CP rail not far from, again, that area of South Hill. And so there was an evacuation in place for that morning. And so, yeah, it was getting the family up and out. And thankfully, we were able to take the family dog and then down to family members who lived in a different part of the city. But that was another reminder that, yes, these things can happen. And then when it comes to a wide scale emergency plan, Mike, I know, we're often asked the question, well, if there was a huge emergency, where would everybody go? If everybody had to evacuate, where would they go? And the answer to that is it depends, right? Because when there was the massive power outage, I think it was in 2019, we were minutes away from having to issue that emergency plan and an evacuation, and the plans were going on behind the scenes for a couple of central locations to put people. But if an emergency were to hit one of those places we have in mind, well, then clearly it's got to be somewhere else, right?
Yeah, and that's where we try and explain to people, and they and get across that it's ever fluid, Craig. It depends on the situation. It depends on what's transpiring, and it depends on what geographical location that's transpiring in. So, having said that, we do have various locations throughout the community that we have set as areas for shelters. But again, how that transpires depends on what area of the community that we are evacuating and where we're moving them to and how we're moving them to. So it's a very in-depth process that we use when we, as an organization in the City of Moose Jaw EMO, open up our emergency operations center, which we call an EOC. When we open up something like that, now we've gone to the bigger picture, and now it's a lot of things come into play, and logistics is one of the largest parts of that. Is how are we going to do things? One, we're going to try and mitigate the situation, and if you talk about, like you said, where we've got a chemical spill or something like that, well, that's something we can, throughout the course of time, we can figure out how we're going to mitigate. But if a tornado was to come through, we're not mitigating that. We're going after the fact into post recovery. But ahead of time, when we get that warning that the tornado's coming, how are we moving people? Where are we moving them to? How are we getting that message across? And you nailed it right on the head. In December 4th of, I think it was the 4th of 2019, when we had the power outage and we had the warming trend with the cold rain and the heavy ice loads on the power lines and stuff like that, and it took out a lot of infrastructure across the province. The City of Moose Jaw, we were working diligently behind the scenes to make sure that we had every aspect covered for our people based on that 72-hour protocol. We were working on the first hours. We weren't working on 72 hours. We were working on the first hours, and we were working diligently. We were putting in requests through the province. We were working hand in hand with the province, directly with the province, and we had started our certain level of an EOC and a virtual EOC, as we call it, and we were within, as you said, minutes from opening our EOC and looking how we were going to start moving people and evacuating people. And luckily things changed at the very last minute. We got the green light, but it was a lot of work behind the scenes that the public would never ever know about. And they don't need to know about. We don't want to scare people. We don't want to say, why aren't you telling us what's going on? Because you don't want to put that scare factor in. When you open your EOC and you start doing this, it's because you've declared a state of local emergency and you need to do this. One thing we always try and say is we don't want to put that wow factor out front or that scare factor out front. We do what we do. We make sure we're doing everything right. We work, like I said, in conjunction with the province and the federal government at times on these situations, and then we move them forward as they need to be. We have a requirement as an organization, once that's in place, that we have to update the regulatory bodies on a regular basis. We have to send in paperwork at every set point to let them know what's transpiring and what we're doing. And then, like I said, it's a complex situation where one of the biggest things for that, and I'll allude to it, for that snowstorm, winter storm, was fuel and fuel sources, so that if we did have to move people, how do we keep the roads clear? How do we keep the graders working? How do we keep those things? And the emergency services, how do we keep the police on the road? How do we keep, so we had to make sure that we had, one was, we were looking at, we had locations for people to go, we had stuff, but we wanted to make sure we had fuels for generators for those places so that we could keep people warm and sheltered and have heat and light. We had to make sure that we had fuel pumps that were operable so that we could keep those graders on the road and those trucks and those police cars and those fire trucks. And then we had to make sure that we had an excess availability of fuel. So those were some of the biggest things we were looking at that point, was bringing in generators, bringing in fuel. And again, for the water treatment plant type of thing too, how are we going to keep water moving so that people potentially have some water? So there's a lot of things that go on, you're right, in the background. But with that, we were this close to opening the EOC, and touch wood, we didn't have to.
Yeah, and back to the app, Sask Alert. As part of that, I was minutes away. I was in the midst of typing up the messaging to send a Sask Alert, at which point they would have quickly reviewed and then issued that alert through their channels, which would have been on your phone and on the radio. It would have been everywhere. It would have broken into programming and issued that emergency alert for Moose Jaw. As I'm typing it up, all the lights came back on, and thankfully we didn't have to take that extra step. But it is another reminder that you should get the Sask Alert app and get it on your phone. In addition to that, we have the City of Moose Jaw app as well, which will also be utilized. And we've already utilized it in some scenarios. I think back to last May, about a year ago, when there were two pretty big fires on South Hill, and so that was a time when we was certainly urgent to push messaging out on a number of channels, all their social media channels, the website, but also the app, to say, you know what, there's these wildfires, grass fires right now, and traffic, stay away from the area, those sorts of things. So we will use our app for that real localized messaging that still involves emergencies, and then for the larger scale, certainly that's when Sask Alert would get involved. So every single channel we have to get the message out, we will use it. And so the more of those that you're able to follow and be a part of, we would encourage that as well, if for no other reason that then when an emergency strikes, you can get that messaging as soon as everybody else does. Deputy Fire Chief Mike Russell, Emergency Preparedness Week. Anything else to add?
No, I just want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank the public for the time to listen to me. It is very important. I know that there's certain times where in our busy days we just don't think about it, but it doesn't take very long to make a plan. It doesn't take very long to get a kit together, and then to sit down with your families. We do the same thing when we teach fire prevention. We say the same thing for your family fire escape plan. Well, this is no different. Sit down, take that 5 minutes to review with your family what we're going to do. We don't have to go overboard and to try and understand the possibilities, but what could strike it. And I mean, we could sit and wonder till the cows come home about that. The key thing is understand. One thing I do want to say is please look at those apps. If you Google emergency preparedness on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, you can Google emergency preparedness 2021 in Canada. Lots will come up. You'll get the government website. You can go onto the Saskatchewan government website too at www.saskatchewan, I think it's .ca, and there's lots of stuff right there for our own area. And then, like I said, you can look and see what to do in our area. You can piece together where Moose Jaw fits into the province and what risks are larger than others, what we need to do. But there's so much out there that if you just take the 5 or 10 minutes, will put you ahead. One thing I do want to allude to, Craig, when you talk about that app and the Moose Jaw app and the Sask Alert, is in the old days everything was reactive, and people reacted based on reactive approaches. We see smoke, we go drive over to see what's going on. Now we can be so much more proactive, where we can say, please don't come here because it's not a good scene. So when people utilize these types of modern technologies, it's so much more proactive than we used to be in the old days. So I think it's very, very important. Please utilize the app, download both apps. Like I said, go online, spend 5 minutes, create a kit, sit down with your family, create a plan, use the PET checklist. It's very important as well. And then once everybody's educated, just please have a safe day.